Hello, I'm Dr. Joel Klenck, an archaeologist, revealing for the first time in history to the global public and the citizens of Turkey Noah's Ark, namely its location, artifacts, features, and origins. This is an emergency because the Ark is rotting because of a melting glacier and continual looting. Before we begin to discuss this archaeological data, in modern or what they call post-processual archaeology, archaeologists are encouraged to discuss their objectives and to talk about their background. My objective is very simple: to preserve at least a portion of Noah's Ark and its artifacts, the most important archaeological site in history. This discussion will show how my background in archaeology and the maritime industry helped me locate Noah's Ark so quickly and identify the structure as the Ark, as opposed to many others who have searched for the site for thousands of years and never found anything or found very little. There's been only two themes in my life: archaeology and the maritime industry. Since I was a child, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. When I started my bachelor's at Northwestern University, there was excellent archaeologists, such as James A. Brown in North American archaeology and Mark Aldenderfer in Andean archaeology. From Aldenderfer, I learned the importance of that archaeological sites at high elevations with regard to Andean archaeology due to ritual where sacrifices were made at the summit of peaks, and also due to the trading of lithic materials. You just didn't stop, archaeologists just could not stop when the vegetation ceased. They had to go to the top of the summit beyond where the vegetation was in order to find other archaeological sites. In North American archaeology, that's where I started doing archaeology, and my first site was at field school called the Robinson Preserve in Chicago, Illinois. The first artifact that I found was one flake. It was a piece of debitage, or a flake used, made in the process of manufacturing stone tools. And this is going to be very important in the story of finding Noah's Ark. The first technique that we were taught was to descend horizontally in 10 centimeter levels and record everything, especially soil color and composition, such as the difference between silt, sand, clay, and the loams thereof. The first feature that I excavated, and this is going to be very important in the discovery of Noah's Ark, or the location, was a post mold. And here I'm giving you an example of post molds at SUSA-1 in the Falevao Valley in northeast Upolu. Here, wood posts are put into the ground and eventually rot. And so what happens is that the wood forms a circle, the post forms a circle surrounded by the lighter, more granular, usually more granular material, soil material. And this is going to be very important in the discussion of Noah's Ark. The second technique I learned was to acquire a vertical view of a feature, try to get a profile view. And that's also very pertinent to the location of Noah's Ark, as you will see. Now, one of the conversations that was done was by a graduate student named Larry. And what he said is that, hey, no dissertations are based on negative data. If there's an archaeological site that needs to be ascertained, try to go directly to the archaeological site instead of Mickey Mouse around the site in order to elucidate what you have to do, and this is especially important in applied archaeology. Now, part of my undergraduate was doing a lot of archaeology. I worked with Fred Plog, or in his organization at New Mexico State University, doing a huge pipeline project. And then with Professor J. Custer on Route 13 in the Delmarva Peninsula, or the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia Peninsula. And here I was exposed to a lot of archaeological cultures, from Paleo-Indian to Archaic to Woodland to Mississippian to what is now the Native American tribes to Colonial period. So just a broad, wonderful exposure to archaeology. Then I went for my junior year abroad to the University of Sheffield, where I studied prehistory and archaeology. And I excavated Iron Age burials in Derbyshire, and then in Winchester, both Roman and medieval contexts. And here I studied zooarchaeology under Paul Halstead. But also what's interesting for Noah's Ark was that the University of Sheffield had a professor that was very focused on animal dung. And this was to prove a very large part of what you have in Noah's Ark. Then I moved over to the Near East, where I did work at Tel Horor in Bronze Age, it's the Middle Bronze Age 2 BC period, but also had other components such as Iron Age and early Arab periods. Also, I worked at Tel Nesana, which is a Roman, Byzantine, and early Arab site, Nitzanim, an early Bronze Age site, Mamsis, which is a Roman, Nabatean, Byzantine, and early Arab site, Shikmim, which was a Chalcolithic site, all different types of archaeological sites. And exposed to so many different archaeological sites, especially as I did my graduate work, where I eventually got my doctorate and my master's at Harvard University. And here, there was just a broad exposure to the archaeology of different types of cultures. I studied Chinese archaeology under Casey Chang. I studied Mesoamerican archaeology under Rosemary Joyce, who has done archaeology throughout the world. And for the archaeology of the Levant, Ofer Bar Yosef and Larry Steger. But in North American archaeology, I studied under Gordon Willey, who is very famous for not only doing North American archaeology, especially the Gulf Coast, but also in Peru, the Viru Valley Project, which is a famous survey. And I also was taught by Stephen Williams, Professor Stephen Williams, North American archaeology. And it was very interesting. One of our conversations that we had, I said, well, how am I going to get permits, to do, how am I going to continue my dissertation work? What's going to happen? I was filled with angst and wonder. And Professor Williams said, just hold on for a second. Harvard finds a way. Harvard finds a way. You have to find a way in order to accomplish the mission that's been given to you to try to save an archaeological site. That never left me, and you'll see how this was very instrumental. These words were very instrumental in the location and my attempts to preserve Noah's Ark. My PhD dissertation was on the Canaanite cultic milieu, focusing on not only identifying when a site was a cult center, what makes a cult center as opposed to contexts that are just purely non-sacred, like a home or even a palace. And then to identify the areas in a sacred precinct, especially in temples, where animals should go and where they should not go. And this is going to be very instrumental in the discussion of the analysis of Noah's Ark. From there, I was all but dissertation, and I started my career in the second aspect of my life, and that was the maritime industry. I joined the United States Marine Corps, and I was an artillery officer. And one of my jobs, I was logistics. I was involved in logistics as the S4 Alpha. Then I was involved in a naval gunfire crew. Then I was attached to a boat company for the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. And all of this was a crash course in learning about the shipping industry, especially from the naval side, the U.S. Navy, especially from the small boats to what the gunboats used by the SEALs called rib boats, to much larger amphibian ships, to the larger destroyers and frigates that have naval gunfire capability. And from there, from this background, I joined the most prestigious maritime corporation in North America, which is Crowley Maritime Corporation. Now, interestingly enough, my first job or series of jobs was in the yield management and pricing and marketing of barges. Crowley had huge barges to Puerto Rico, and there were two types that were pulled by tugs. These barges were pulled by tugs, and there was two types of barges, 580-foot barges and 730-foot barges. All of them had 3 decks. And our job as analysts were try to analyze the architecture to see how much cargo we could fit in to make the most profit as possible. So just a huge exposure to the maritime industry, especially, and this is very interesting in terms of Noah's Ark, the 580 barges are very similar to Noah's Ark, and especially the 3 decks. It's also talked about as being part of the Noah's Ark account. From Mike and Tom, I learned about fixed and variable costs. From individuals like Rudy and Jerry, basically famous individuals in the industry, you learned operation. But one of the things that was very interesting was this individual named Marty. And Marty was very instrumental in ship's architecture. And we had a collegial friendship, and I told him I was very interested in maritime architecture. And he went to a maritime architecture school. And here he prompted my interest in the analysis of ancient maritime architecture, specifically the angled hulls, the attached furniture, the bulkheads, the use of different types of wood or primary types of wood, including cypress, which was resisted electrostatic energy, and also the ancient ships being covered with bitumen to add in their being sealed. Also different types of joinery, such as mortise and tenon or coke and dowel, and the use of tree nails, what they call tree nails, or before the advent of metal spikes, the use of wooden pins. And then on the exterior of hull, what crustaceans and barnacles did to ancient vessels. Now in 2008, I was hired by another company, Burnuth Lines, to take over their Bahama service. And here what was very interesting was ballasting, of filling the ballast tanks up or flushing the ballast tanks to add not only to lift the vessel up in shallow waters, but also for added stability. Now, all of these lessons are going to be very instrumental in the analysis of Noah's Ark, as we will see. Then I went back to archaeology and started PRC. And one of the things that I was most involved with was expeditions in archaeology in Polynesia. I was the territorial archaeologist and briefly the historic preservation officer in American Samoa. And here, one of the greatest things about the Polynesian culture is it's the widest distribution of a language across a geographical area. Just think about it. From Samoa, you go north to Hawaii, south to New Zealand, and east to Rapa Nui. And what was very wonderful lessons in terms of the building of vessels, to have these incredibly long trans-Pacific voyages, specifically the Fautasi boats and also the small Elias, and where they also, what was instrumental in the building of these vessels was the use of adzes. Adzes is a stone, it's like an axe-like artifact to hollow out the logs to use as part of these vessels. I also was the senior lecturer at the National University of Samoa in Archaeology and Cultural Heritage. Again, this tremendous focus on maritime cultures. Now, I had I had a horrible death in the family, but I'm continuing to work in areas that are right near the coast to focus on, again, maritime cultures that are very familiar with maritime trade and maritime subsistence procurement. The procurement of fish, molluscan material to supplement their diets. Now, just on a personal level, I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. And I believe that He's the King and the Savior of the world. And one thing that was just instrumental in my life was the miraculous. My dad had liver cancer. And he was always worked with the church. And everyone prayed that he would be cured. And when they went in to remove the liver, or remove the cancer from the liver, the cancer was gone. It was truly a miracle. So what I've learned is that, yes, there is scientific laboratory and there's the positivistic side of science, but also I learned to not have a presupposition. Occasionally God steps in time and history and does the miraculous. Now you will see how these aspects of my background help me locate Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, and then help me identify the structure as Noah's Ark, a monumental prehistoric maritime barge. The Ark is the Rosetta Stone between science and faith. The Ark is a miracle, but a miracle that can be located and tested and measured and dated.